Testing, testing. Hey, there we are. You there?
I'm here.
All right.
Yeah, I'm
You
here.
are here. All
Seriously.
right. Well, there's lots of fellowship going on in the room, which is awesome. And we're not trying to, by any means, stifle that. But we do have people online who have joined us, and they're probably wondering what in the world's going on. Hey, Doug. Morning. I know one of the people who join us online every week is Brian Holloway's mother, Mrs. Holloway. And I see her usually on there. Sometimes she even makes comments about our class. So we'll just say hi to Mrs. Holloway and the rest that are online as these fine folks that are still carrying on their conversation either decide to stay, which, by the way, I've been really blessed that Bob Abney has stayed with us the last 2 weeks. It was not intentional, but then he liked the class and he has stayed. So anyway, take it away.
Okay, I think maybe a good place to start would be a very, very quick review of last week. Just mention and then add a couple of new things, and that'll get us started. One of the things I want you to remember is that when we began the lesson last week, we talked about there were just 2 or 3, 4 really key things we talked about, and John Micah touched on those last week, actually more than they did this week. But it states Joseph's age. We can trace Joseph's age very well because it gives us the beginning of chapter 37. It tells us he was 17. We find in chapter 19, we don't know how long before he was sent into slavery or sold into Egypt. So somewhere he was 17, we know that for sure. Then we find out later he's 28. We can pin that down. We'll tell you that when we get there. We know when he was 30 years old, 7 years of famine, so we know when he's 37 years old. And then it tells us that in the second year of the famine.
Yeah, 2 years passed.
But what happened there in the second year of the famine, we don't know if that's the beginning. Is probably his 30, maybe his 39th year. But by the end of the time that when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and they come down, the text then says, that it tells you that he says that it's been 2 years since the famine started. So we can pin him down at that point to 39. So then there's some other dates that bring. So we do have a chronology more than we have on a lot of people about Joseph. The second thing was we noticed last week he was a Na'ar, and I explained that those verses could be translated. We explained the verses could be translated that he was only a shepherd with his brothers. He was shepherding his brothers. The Hebrew can be translated that way just as easily. That makes incredible sense. That's why he was given this fancy robe. He was actually becoming the crown sheik. And then we also notice one more thing that I'll let Stan come in.
You're fine.
And that is you've got this person who the text says Joseph. He loved Joseph more than all his other brothers because he was the son of his old age. Well, then he had to love Benjamin more than he loved Joseph, didn't he? Benjamin's a few years younger than Joseph. So the idiom expression, one of my favorite professors at Hebrew Union used to say, that can't mean literally what it says. It meant Joseph was an old age son. He was a mature child. Very mature child. That makes a lot of sense, mature child. But the father had put him over, notice, not the sons of Leah. They're not involved. Puts them over the sons of the 2 concubines. So that was one of the things that we need to notice. And it's the sons of Leah that caused him the most problem. Then we won't spend a lot of time with this right now. You didn't even know I was going to do this next thing. And we could go through in chapters 29 and 30. It gives you a meaning for every one of the child's names. Reuben, means, you hear Leah, you got this competition going on between Leah and Rachel. And Leah feels very unloved, and the text says she was unloved. The word hate is a strong word there. It's a very broad word. But anyway, so she has the first child, and so she names him, look, a boy. Look, a son. And then she has another child, another child, another child. But all the children's names, the meanings are given. For example, Judah means, it's from the verb to be thankful for. And it's from where the modern Hebrew word, when you're in Israel, you say Todah a lot. Todah, thank you.
Thank you.
That comes from Judah. That comes from the name Judah. So the same root is Judah. So anyway, Joseph means something like, may he add another son. And so she does have another thing.
Which we're going to unpack some of this actually,
Okay.
more so this morning. So, and interestingly, Leah had half of the tribes of
Right.
Israel.
Yeah, she has 4. Then the concubines have 2 each, and then finally, Rachel has a child named Joseph.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So a little bit then of review, and we found some different pictures we liked. This is actually from a children's illustrated version of Joseph. This is the sheaves bowing down that John went over this morning, and we touched on a little bit last week. But just look at the characters here. Look at the guy sitting down and kind of going, "Really? I mean, are you serious about this?" And you can see the discussion that's going on over there with kind of the slanted eyes while Joseph is explaining his dream, and we want to keep that in mind because we have a theory about some of this. And then look at this one. This is where Jacob is probably trying to calm him down a little bit and saying, "Hey, enough is enough. This is getting out of hand. You really think that I and your mother," which John brought up, Rachel has passed away. So the assumption is the mother there is the mother of the family, which would then default to Leah. And so he's just saying, you're really going to have the older generation, the parents, if you will, bow down to you. And this kind of shows him, kind of giving him a hand on the shoulder, kind of saying, all right, that's enough. Let's move on. But this phrase highlighted at the bottom, his father kept in mind what Joseph said. Keep that in your mind, because we're going to come back to that here in a couple slides. So in verses 5 through 11, the tension continues to mount to a crisis, which the brothers attempt to resolve by getting rid of Joseph. That was, I thought, very well this morning on this idea of kill the dreamer, kill the dream. That's a great way of summarizing what they probably thought their logic was, which is, well, we can solve this problem. None of this will actually happen if we just get rid of him. And so I thought that was very good. And then here's the idea. Look at the top of this slide. Jacob treasured these things in his heart. Where have we heard that phrase before? That's what Mary did about what was going on with Jesus, right? Specifically when he was 12, they couldn't find him. They find him in the temple. She gets the explanation of where he was, and the text says she treasured all these things in her heart. Well, that's the exact same phrase that Jacob is saying about what Joseph's dreams are. Exactly. Joe's saying he's mindful of more than what we're seeing. He's contemplating and kind of turning this over in his mind of, this is a situation I need to kind of diffuse and get him out of, and I'm not sure I understand it, but I'm not going to forget today. There's something about this. There's more to this than meets the eye. And that's what Mary was doing with when she treasured things in her heart about Jesus too. She didn't understand everything Jesus was saying. She knew how he had been conceived. Joseph wasn't really his father biologically, and yet, years go by, he grows up like a normal child, and then he says things, and she kind of goes, yeah, I'll just have to hang on to that and think about it. Well, that's what Jacob's doing here. He's hanging on to what Joseph says and thinking about it. And, we don't usually see the connections to those because we don't always have our Old Testament and our New Testament right together in our minds. But that's what that phrase would mean. And it's thought-provoking, right?
Yeah, he chastises him and said, like Stan said, and says, let's cool it down and all. But at the same time, he remembers that Joseph has interpreted these two dreams, and he has a high regard for Joseph, and I think he was a mature son. I think that's why he put him over those children. He started with the concubine sons, who are the least important, and then he's going to work his way to put them over Leah's sons, and they say it's not going to happen.
And look at what it says there on the screen. We can't be dogmatic about this, but it seems likely. Might Jacob have remembered Isaac's blessing over him that said something to the effect of, those who you bless, the Lord will bless. Those who you curse, the Lord will curse. Well, if he's given this special tunic to his son and blessed him with it and blessed him with the oversight of the other brothers, then the dream might make a lot of sense. That if God's with him, then this dream that he's seeing could very well come true. And that might be what Jacob was thinking at the time, and might be why he treasured the things in his heart. But he basically says right now, enough is enough. When he was still several miles, he sent Joseph several miles to check on them, the sons of Leah most likely, stripped him of his coat, threw him into the empty cistern, and then sold him there to merchants and slave traders that were on their way to Egypt. And so we had gotten to this picture last week, and we're not by any means up here suggesting that he went willingly. Of course, he was not happy about this. But it is interesting that there's not any violence in it. There might have been words, there might have been a struggle, that type of thing, but it's fascinating to me that compared to some of the stories of David, where there was a lot of physicality between disagreements, that's not in the text. It's just they got him and they put him in the cistern, and that was that. And they sold him, and it was interesting that when they sat down to eat their food, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying spices and balm and myrrh and going down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, "Hey, what profit would it be to kill him? I mean, for crying out loud, he is our own blood. He is our brother. So let's sell him and make some money."
Yeah, Reuben had put the idea in mind. When Reuben was not there when they stripped him of his robe, and Reuben then came and saw that he was in the pit, and Reuben said, the text tells you that Reuben, in the back of his mind, was, I'm going to save Joseph. We need to keep in mind what happened to Reuben, and I think we come back to that maybe later, but Reuben...
Yeah, because this is Judah here. Judah's the one who first says, let's not take his blood. Right?
I think Reuben's first one says that.
Was it? All right, then maybe I typed that
We'll
wrong.
We'll have to double check that. And the one that was wrong won't be here next week.
Right.
Wrong. It's just a little humor there. But anyway, Reuben is trying his best to save Joseph. I think to get him back home, because Reuben was firstborn, but he, as you'll see on Jacob's deathbed, he will tell him, what you did. What did he do? He had an affair with the mother of two of the concubines, two of the sons. One of the concubines, he had a sexual relations with her. I think it was Rachel's concubine. And so he forfeited his position. So I think he just doesn't have that first son power. So he can just make suggestions. Judah very clearly takes over. And Judah is a very, very powerful son. And he does a lot of the talking through the rest of the story. When they get back home, after they've been to Egypt, they get back home. Reuben speaks up, but his words do not persuade Jacob. Judah's words persuade Jacob. And finally, she said, all right, take Benjamin with you. Go ahead.
Good point. So here's some different images of what it might have looked like with them coming to take him into trade. And there's the brothers there on your right with the 20 shekels of silver that they got paid for selling him. And then here's, I don't know who the artist is, but this was a different type thing where notice the different drawings of Joseph. Here down in the lower left, he looks like he's a strong individual. Up in the right, he kind of looks like a younger kid. And then in this one, he kind of looks like a pasty fella who's been in the cistern for a little too long, and he's coming out of the hole there in the ground. So you can get all kinds of different representations from people's interpretation of the drawings. But take us through the journey that he went on once they put him on their camels.
Yeah, we'll show you another map in just a minute showing you where Joseph was born, but this picks up the story where Stan was telling you that the brothers, probably the sons of Leah, at least the main sons of Leah, you could send all your children on a mission like this, because remember, Abraham is said to be rich over and over and over again, just filthy rich. Communicates with the king of the Philistines, communicates with Pharaoh, has relation with him, leaves most of his inheritance to Isaac. Isaac leaves most of his inheritance to Jacob, and then Jacob goes and picks up another fortune in Mesopotamia. This is a filthy rich family, and we're talking about dollar signs or shekel signs. They say shekel signs here. A lot of money is involved here. And so this is part of the problem. So anyway, probably is the main sons of Leah that are up there. So the father sends. Notice it. The father sends Joseph to check on them. And so somewhere where this is a few months later, whatever, but it's very clear here that Joseph is rising to a very, very strong position in the family. So when he gets to Shechem, the brothers have moved someplace else. He finds out they're in Dothan, goes to Dothan, and that's where this happens. And then he gets sent on his way to Egypt.
There's the other map.
And the reason we put this map in was because this is Joseph's life here. He's born in Hebron while they were in Mesopotamia, the 11th child. Then they're moving southward and move back, and they're almost to Bethlehem when Benjamin is born. So this is kind of showing you that.
Yeah, sort of the life travels of Joseph.
Right.
So here's your comments where Reuben comes back. Now Reuben is surprised. He has not been right around while they decided to sell him, and then he comes back and he says the Na'ar is not here. And then he finds out, we decided to sell him instead of holding him in the cistern. And so then he has this sentence, and where can I go? And I thought you might unpack that for us. That's a statement of devalue because of what's happened to Joseph.
Right. I think Reuben, was thinking, I'm going to save him some way. So the suggestion is made with Reuben and Judah that there'd be why kill him? Why do that? Why lay our hands on him when we can actually sell him? And so I think in his mind, this is going to be a way to kind of get him back in his good graces of his father. That's my thinking on it. And so now he's gone. He's sold. He's gone. And so Reuben is just really upset.
Yeah, he has no way back to restoration with Jacob. So they take Joseph's tunic. I thought this was interesting. If we read the text closely, we'll see things sometimes we haven't really noticed, or if we read it too fast, maybe we noticed it, but we just didn't really think about it. We found this. Determine now whether it is your son's tunic. Well, all that we've talked about in the last 2 weeks about the tunic, that's insulting. It's almost comically insulting. Who else would have a long-sleeved, long tunic other than the person who had been given the position to be the overseer of the work, and add the colors to it that we're saying is fine? It could have had colors, like we looked at the Egyptian clothing, last week. whose else would it be? I mean, why would you have a tunic out somewhere? But then they also say, is this your son's tunic? So they've disassociated themselves with Joseph. They're not even saying, is this our brother's tunic? And why wouldn't they be able to recognize it? Why does only Jacob get to recognize it, and then it's his sons? So they have divorced themselves from Joseph in just how they're talking in their wording.
Yeah, they've covered it with blood, maybe, but just think of the guilt that must be running through some of them's mind, as they know this is Joseph's tunic, and so and obviously the blood on there was to make it look like some animal had attacked him. But anyway.
So what was Jacob's mistake then? We don't know necessarily, but I think you and I, on some of the conversations we'd basically come to the conclusion that maybe his mistake was not educating the other sons about why he gave Joseph the tunic and why he put Joseph over them. So it could have been haste, might have been the mistake. It could have been, knowing that this privilege for Joseph was something that would have ultimately worked out fine, but he didn't recognize it was going to cause the animosity and the hate from his brothers towards Joseph. And in hindsight, he might have introduced it a little differently. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, I think you're right, 100%. Yeah. Laban started this problem by tricking Jacob at the wedding, and he's thinking he's getting Rachel, and it turns out he's getting Leah, and he's drinking too much, and then he doesn't know that till the next morning. The Hebrew says, and behold, it was Leah.
Surprise!
Yeah, surprise. The surprise. And he was quite upset about it. He had to work 7 years to get to that point. But then if you remember the story, he doesn't wait another 7 years. He goes ahead and negotiates. He said, here's my credit card. You give me now, and I'll work the 7 years for her. But anyway, so he had put in, he didn't expect to get Leah. And it says the Lord saw that Leah was unloved. And the Lord helped bless Leah because it wasn't her fault. It was her dad's fault.
So what caused the family issue? Well, it is possible that Joseph's reporting, that's what lots of people like to go to, right? And coat wearing and dream sharing are a intentional flaunting of his favor, setting him up early as a trickster. This is what several scholars and several different just good Bible students will propose. But it may have been his own deception that begins Joseph's trek to Egypt as well. He might not have realized that he was kind of being a jerk and a little bit too egotistical or whatever, and didn't realize what he's saying. All those are okay, but like Dr. Cloud alluded to at the beginning of the class, Joseph's name means in Hebrew, he shall add or God shall add. It doesn't mean trickster. It doesn't mean deceiver. It doesn't mean anything that the character of Joseph would be described as really being able to say, oh yeah, that's definitely what that first paragraph is suggesting. So we don't think he's a trickster. We think he might have been a little too trusting.
Egotistical or...
It could have been at 17, highly possible, but definitely too trusting. Like, go ahead and let me tell you the dreams, not because he was flaunting it necessarily, but because he could actually do it. And he thought that by sharing it, they would be interested hearing what the dreams meant, and really, he probably should have not shared his dreams at all. He should have just kept them to himself.
Right.
So that leads to this question then. Joseph may not have had the maturity to realize how his behavior insulted his brothers. That's another reference from Genesis 37:4. Either way, Joseph's brothers are unable to separate Joseph's personality and ego from his dreams and his interpretations. And in the end, they despise and betray him for it. Genesis 37:11 and 19 through 20, which John went over in the sermon this morning. And that's where we come up with the Rodney and Stan version, Hebrew, a son of old age was he to him. This expression might mean maturity beyond his years. So we're concluding or coming down on the idea that what Jacob did was saw that Joseph was the most mature, regardless of being younger than some of his older brothers. And therefore he gave him the tunic, and therefore he treasured these things, because he's not going to forget what he's saying about the dreams, because he believes that the kid has this ability, right? And that this is something to hang on to. But because he didn't communicate that well with his brothers, that became a younger brother being put over older brothers and caused the whole problem.
Yeah, we're going to see when he gets down to Egypt. We have a shot here of him going to prison. We really don't know if he went to prison immediately. He sold to Potiphar, but we'll come to that in just a minute. But
Yeah.
he quickly rises. Potiphar also saw that there was something. This was a very talented person, and you'll see that in a few minutes. But
Yeah.
I had Stan put this in there because it showed he's probably now 18 or 19 years old. You know, in Scripture, a lot of times things move very, very rapidly. Somebody might be 22 years old, and the next thing you know, they're 35, and in just a few verses.
We do the same thing. We tell stories and we jump months or years to
Right.
the next major thing in our lives that
Right.
we're telling somebody about.
Right.
So whenever this gets written down, Moses is writing it and saying, well, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. Well, those things happened, but they didn't happen Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They happened, they happened January, October, the next February,
Right.
whatever. And it
Yeah.
just ends up in sequence that way.
Right. And here, we're going to, when the famine is over, Joseph is 37 years old, or when he becomes governor, is 30 years. So we've got from the 17 to the 30 to account for. Well, we can account for the 28 years old. Well, you'll see that in a little while or next week.
Yeah, so Dr. Cloud didn't like this picture just because of the background with the stairs coming down and not necessarily being able to support what that might be. So we put in a different one, which here's maybe an example of Potiphar giving the bag of money to the Midianites to say, yes, I'll purchase this person. And so different options. I mean, we know he was sold to Potiphar. We know Potiphar paid for him. We know that it was a deal was brokered and that he actually was a possession, unfortunately. But this may be how it started. But as has been alluded to, Joseph was soon over Potiphar's palace, probably now 18 to 20 years old in Genesis 39, 4 through 6. And this is unbelievable. Because first of all, you would think that somebody that you've paid money for that's not connected to your family would probably not be trusted like a family member would. And then he rises, as you said, to command and authority and trust. Really, trust is probably the biggest word we need to use. Command and authority, I guess, could be given to anybody. You could give a general, who doesn't really care about life or anything else, command and authority. But trust that he will make the right decisions. And ultimately, we're told in the text that Potiphar doesn't really have to worry about anything. I mean, nothing. He just, Joseph will take care of it. Whatever it is.
Yeah. So he may be 20, 21 years old by now when this is all happening. And we know he's old enough to catch Potiphar's wife's eye. We'll see that later on.
Yeah, we'll see that. But here, Yahweh was clearly with Joseph, chapter 39, verse 5. I mean, this isn't happening only because Joseph is so superior to everybody else or so advanced beyond his years. God is enabling him. Everything he does, he's blessing, and God is blessing the people that he's doing it with. So Potiphar's house actually gets blessed because Joseph's in it. Not because it would have been blessed necessarily without him, but it's definitely being blessed because Joseph is present, because God's blessing Joseph.
Right. And there's a word in the text, you'll see it sometimes in your English translations, that he succeeded. And sometimes it says God caused him to succeed. Sometimes it says that he succeeded. So he had a lot of ability. There's no doubt about that. Very quickly. I mean, here you buy this slave, and the next thing you know, the slave is running your house. But the next thing, maybe 2 years later, but still in all, he just had a lot of ability. It's just like when we talk about the life of David, and he fights Goliath in chapter 17. He's called a Na'ar, just like, and you have to go back to the chapter before when he goes up to Saul's palace to try to be the musician. And the reason he's called is because this one of the officials says to Saul, "Oh, there's a guy down in Bethlehem. He is brave." This is you don't know his age yet. He's brave. He is a warrior.
He's tall.
He is he is speaks very well. Plays the instrument very well. He's good size. Same expression is going to be used of Joseph when Potiphar's wife sees him. The Hebrew Bible says she saw that he was well built and handsome, is the latest Jewish translation. Well built and handsome. The same expression is used of David before he ever fights Goliath. And then it says that the Lord was with him, had a track record. So Joseph rises because of his own ability, plus God is helping him.
Yeah, and we're going to, so we should pause here for a second and kind of give you a little bit of the plan. So we're going to introduce this. We're not going to exhaustively do it all. We're going to come back after Easter, so 2 weeks from today. We're taking a break from Joseph next week. The sermon will be a special sermon about Easter, and we'll come back to this. So this is kind of a teaser to something you most likely already know, which is the whole situation with Potiphar's wife. But we had more detail than we would have time this morning to put in if we tried to pack it all into today. So we're going to introduce it, then we'll come back to it. But what's interesting is this. This was one of the pictures, and there's all kinds of different depictions. I mean, half the time you see these photos or drawings or artistic creations of what it must have looked like. You notice even in the pictures we've already seen of Potiphar, the men aren't wearing any shirts. They're just wearing these collars or something. In this case, Joseph has some more clothes on than we'll see in some of the other pictures, but the suggestion in the picture is he's being noticed by Potiphar's wife before the actual day of her approaching him. It's not like she hasn't noticed him working around the palace, taking care of the things that Potiphar's put him in charge of, probably impressed with the fact that he has that type of authority, but also, as the side says there, she saw that he was well built and handsome, as you just said from the translation, and probably 22 to 25 years old at this time. So she has had her head turned by Joseph, and she's starting to think about what she wants to do because of that. And then that gets to later in 39, 12 through 20, which, like I said, we'll have a lot more information about this in 2 weeks. But the Hebrew actually says there he ran, like his pants are on fire, like get out of there, like not just, oh, we shouldn't do this, I can't be here, but like just get out of there as if the ship is sinking, right? Like this is an emergent type departure, and I think you had something you were going to compare that to, or maybe I'm not remembering.
I was thinking about something else. Let me come back to that. Yeah,
right.
Notice the idioms he's using. Pants are on fire. See, those are idioms.
Right.
Ship was sinking.
Yes.
We have all those idioms in English.
Urgency.
Yeah, urgency really showing.
Don't fool around.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Stan noted, and it's really important, that here is a guy that is compared a lot to Jesus because of his character. Now, when we say we compare him a lot to Jesus, because you look at all the people in the Old Testament and you see this, he might have been a little foolish when he was 17, 18 years old about the dreams with his brothers, the way he handled that. But he is, he's a very talented person. That is very, very clear, and apparently very good looking. But he has very high standards. I mean, once we begin seeing what he says and all, when he's older, he just shows a tremendous amount of maturity and understanding and character. Yeah. And I think that's why he's compared with Jesus so much.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. That's what I was thinking. When Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, he's confident. No, man will live by the word of God, not by bread alone. and he makes these decisions very quickly when temptation is given to him. That's what we mean. Joseph is doing the same thing.
Right.
He's not sitting there going like, I will put this in, and we'll talk about it more in 2 weeks. But if he's got that much control, and if Potiphar trusts him that much, that literally the text says that Potiphar doesn't even worry about anything other than what he eats, which basically just means his own personal things that he wouldn't share with anybody else. The whole household, everything is run by Joseph. He could have gotten away with probably having an affair with Potiphar's wife as long as she didn't tell him.
Yeah, later you're going to see, it seems very clear that Potiphar is a very high official, and that he is actually the one who is running in his palace. There is a big section, maybe the basement, whatever it is, where the king's prisoners are kept. Very important prisoners are kept here. And so he was a very powerful man, no doubt about it.
So the point being is that Joseph is so determined to say no that none of that even runs through his head. Could I get away with it? Is there a way that this could be fun or happen and there'll be no one really harmed? And he says, there will be someone harmed. I would be sinning against God.
Yes.
And so he runs out.
Be sinning against God.
Right. And so we got these different depictions of what it might look like. Here he is running away from her. Here she has his outer garment, and now there's the claim that he, which we're going to get into what that claim is. Some of the translations have a word like he tried to humiliate her, and we're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. This is Potiphar leading him off, saying, okay, you've been caught red-handed. Here's back to kind of the VBS one, which it was a little confusing. I don't know if the money over there in the right-hand side, if this is him being sold and she's already taken notice of him when Potiphar's buying him, or if this is her saying, this is the guy that tried to humiliate me and now he's being carried away. But that would mean the guy with the money. I'm not really sure what he's there for. So not sure, but it was a high-resolution picture. And then here's a different one where he's kind of more Egyptian-clothed or lack thereof, and she's in a pampered type of area. But more details on this, I said next week, really 2 weeks away when we come back after Easter. We've got a lot more about this little episode and the story and what follows from it than you've probably heard before, which I think will be good. So we wanted to end this today then with something a little different. We wanted to go back to family. If you remember last week, we talked about good fathers, good parents, bad parents. The Torah had family regulations in it. And you'll notice on these bullet points, there were things like sexual relations that were outlined in Leviticus 18, relations concerning the rights of inheritance in a family, laws to protect the vulnerable in society, the Levirate marriage law requiring a man to marry his brother's widow, which also comes up in the story of Joseph, and then the commandment to honor father and mother, which the other brothers really didn't honor Jacob by lying to him and telling him that his favored son had been killed. So I got to thinking about all this, and it really made it interesting that when we look through, the words translated family in the Bible can vary from various things, but basically what it comes down to, and you've heard us probably say this phrase before, is house of the father. So the house that Joseph was a part of was the house of Jacob. And the house of Jacob's reputation changed when Joseph ended up being disconnected from it. Like now it's not a house of 12 brothers, it's a house of 11 as far as they know, because, well, Jacob assumes that his son's dead. The brothers don't know what happened to him, but they obviously don't have any details. And so this idea of tribe or house is very interesting, because when we think about Joseph, the cover-up for selling Joseph were lies by his brothers. That breaks one of those family values from the Torah. Breaking Jacob's heart, causing grief and the feeling of loss over Joseph would obviously not be honoring their father. Reuben and his misdeeds, which we'll talk about, you've already talked about with the concubine. The story of Tamar and Judah, which is chapter 38, that, if we don't know what to do with that chapter a lot of times, but that shows the Levirate vow and the time that went by while Joseph was getting older. And then when all of this takes place, the father's house has changed, And what ends up happening is that Joseph doesn't have a house anymore. He's got the house of Potiphar, really. And he's not related to Potiphar. So it's interesting that he rises to that power level and authority in a house that's not his biological house and is not really a house that, or clan or tribe that is governed by the Torah, because he's in Egypt. So they've got their own gods, they've got their own religion, if you will. We need to keep that in mind, that he has lost all the things that were the structure for family from a Hebrew and has joined what is a structure for family or the household of Potiphar in Egypt. And I think that's important. This person had this interesting saying, life is a predicament which precedes death. And it sounds kind of negative, but here's Joseph's predicament. His father believed he was dead, and his brothers were unaware of his circumstances. All the benefits of being a member of the house of Jacob vanished for Joseph. He was cut off, disinherited, and considered deceased by his biological family for 22 years, which would get him to 39, before the house of Jacob was reunited by Yahweh in Genesis 50:20, which we'll eventually get to. So, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. When we use the word Torah or Torah, it's really pronounced Torah in Hebrew, but most people say Torah. We're talking about the Pentateuch. So when we say Pentateuch, it's funny. People, oh, I know what that is. That's the first 5 books. Well, that's a Greek word. The Pentateuch is a Greek word, the 5 scrolls. Torah is the term that the Jewish Bible uses for the first part. It's broken up into law, prophets, writing. And the word Torah or Torah is a word that means guidance, instructions. And so many times we'll go back and say, well, here Leviticus says this, or Deuteronomy says this. Well, that's part of the Pentateuch, part of the Torah. And that's why, we probably use it freely. But in English-speaking people, usually people use English translations, refer to it as, which is kind of funny, as the Pentateuch, the 5 scrolls there. And the reason for that is the first translation ever made of the Bible was the Septuagint, or the Greek Old Testament in Alexandria, Egypt. It was, and therefore, that was very, very important to the early Christians. And the New Testament quotes the Pentateuch, or the Greek version, about 70% of the time, and quotes the Hebrew Old Testament only about 30% of the time.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the other thing you brought to my mind is some people also just call the whole 5 books the law. And even though obviously it's got narrative in it, and right now we're not in anything that has anything to do with law while we're talking about the story of Joseph, but they include it in there. So
yeah, it says it includes, in Exodus 20, includes the 10 Commandments, and the whole book of Deuteronomy is a restatement of the law. And so the word law is just a part of the Torah. The word really means guidance, instruction. And part of those instructions are by actually stating laws. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. And another part of it is showing how God deals with people. Look how instructive the book of Genesis is. It tells us where man came from. It tells us about creation. It tells us about the flood story, what happened after the flood. It gives us the whole history of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. That's instructive. And these stories, the reason we looked at Joseph's story is because it tells us a lot about life and about family and how about integrity and a lot of things. So it's instruction.
Well, we've come right up to the end of our class, and if you look on the screen, I think I know the answer to this for almost everyone online and in here, but before this lesson, did you believe your family was the only family with challenges? You could put problems there. You could put other words that could be synonyms for challenges, but how does the story of Joseph help us with our family members? And I think that's kind of for where we are in the story right now, and then when we come back after Easter and we look at what happens next for Joseph and how he rises to power again, very similarly to the way he has in Potiphar's house, and then finally gets reunited with his brothers, and how that might be expected to go compared to how it actually does. That's the power of the story of Joseph. So that's kind of tried to be encapsulated into this prayer. And let's just end class with this. We just pray, thank you, Almighty and all-knowing God, for orchestrating my journey, our journey. Thank you for being a God who can turn an evil intention into a beautiful story. Thank you for being the kind of God who keeps his promises no matter how long it takes. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray.